The Positive Pause is a motivational-minded podcast covering topics women want to know about as they journey to and through menopause, focusing on subjects that impact women's health and healthy aging, including what it means to age healthfully. The Positive Pause features experts and influencers from a variety of industries and specialties. The information and opinions expressed on the Positive Pause are not intended to replace the services of trained professionals or to provide specific medical advice. To see the National Menopause Foundation's full medical disclaimer, please visit nationalmenopausefoundation.org.
Welcome to the Positive Pause. I'm Claire Gill, founder of the National Menopause Foundation. Joining me for this episode is Dr. Mache Seibel, a leading menopause expert who helps women get the information they need to feel better, have more control over their life and their work and relationships. He is a 25-year member of the Harvard Medical Faculty, author of the best-selling books The Estrogen Window and The Estrogen Fix, and editor of the #1 digital magazine for midlife women, HotYearsMag.com. His latest book is Working Through Menopause: The Impact on Women, Businesses, and the Bottom Line. Before transitioning to focus on menopause, Dr. Seibel was a leading expert in infertility who performed some of the very first in vitro fertilization successes in the United States. Dr. Seibel has published over 200 scientific articles and 17 books for both professionals and consumers, and has received multiple national awards for patient education, research, and writing. He also happens to be an award-winning musician. He is board certified in gynecology and reproductive medicine and a Menopause Society certified menopause practitioner. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Dr. Seibel.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be with you.
So I just think it's fascinating that one of the focuses of your early career was infertility, and now you're addressing women's health at menopause. What made you pivot from women's health and reproductivity to women's health and menopause?
Well, I say I used to do sperm to term, and now I do womb to tomb. So the answer to your question, though, is that it was for a personal reason, and that is my wife had surgery that threw her into early menopause just 6 months after the infamous Women's Health Initiative, or WHI study, came out, suggesting incorrectly that taking hormones would increase the risk of breast cancer, heart disease, and a whole lot of other things. And basically, her doctors were really reluctant to want to treat her. And so I transitioned from the reproductive world into the menopause world because I felt that I had to figure it out so that Sharon wouldn't have to tough it out. And I'm glad that I did, because in truth, it's been a complicated story to unravel. But the bottom line is estrogen is safe for the majority of women. And if for some reason women can't or won't take hormones, there are lots of other options that we have to educate women about.
It's certainly a topic that is confusing both for women going through menopause and actually for a lot of clinicians, because, as you said, some of the earlier studies put some serious warnings on hormone replacement therapy, and then it was really hard to get the word out more recently about what the study's long-term view was. We hear consistently from women that they often feel ignored by their healthcare provider when they ask about the symptoms they're experiencing, particularly in perimenopause. And why in 2023 we're still finding it so hard to find healthcare professionals and people who know how to engage in conversation about menopause transition. This is true even with gynecologists. Why do you think that is?
Well, it is unfortunate, but there is a reason for it, and that is because there's not enough training the OBGYNs and the primary cares and family practitioners in the area of menopause. We know that 10 years ago, there was a survey done that showed that it was a survey that was sent to the training programs for OBGYNs, and they found out that only 20% of all training programs, of all residency training programs, provide any information on menopause. And it's much less. It's only about 10% of that in the primary care world. And then if you add on top of that a recent survey that came out just a few months ago, it showed that when they resurveyed those same centers, the numbers have improved a little from 20% to 30%, but still only 7 out of 10 training programs provide no training at all in menopause. And yet, while women do have babies, not all do. Women will have infertility, not all do. Women will have bladder problems, not all do. Women will have cancer, unfortunately, but not all do. But every woman who lives long enough will go through menopause. And so it's something we have to look at as essential. And that transition into menopause not only affects the women, but it also affects the partners that they have, their relationships, and it affects the workplace in which they are employed or they run or own, because they have to then function at the highest levels in business. And so the symptoms of menopause are not just some little bothersome issue. They're highly, highly impactful.
It's such an important comments that you've made there. As you said, if we're living long enough, we're all going to experience menopause, and you think that would be the greater priority, but we know that that is just not the case. So it's really important that we help women to learn more about menopause and the stages of menopause themselves, and so that they can then be more informed in the questions and the things that they ask their provider. And as you said, that's particularly important for women who are really at high levels, maybe in their professional career during this stage of life. So your latest book is about working through menopause and its impact. And as you might know, the National Menopause Foundation, we partnered with Bank of America earlier this year on a study of the topic of menopause in the workplace. Can you share some of the key insights from your book? And then also, what inspired you as a physician to address menopause in the workplace?
Well, I'll answer the last one first and then come back to the first part. What really inspired me is the many, many women I've spoken with through the years that have expressed challenges in the workplace that have caused them to either drop out of the workplace, that have caused them to feel that they aren't comfortable taking the next leap in the next assignment, the next level in the workplace, because they're worried that their symptoms may prevent them from optimizing their abilities. And also women who are executives that I've either taken care of or have coached, they are sometimes struggling because it's hard enough to get the position, and then they're in the position. How can they possibly feel comfortable letting everyone know that they're having these hot flashes, that they're having foggy thinking, that they're having fatigue, all the issues that are so common? It's very hard to want to expose yourself in that way when you already had to overcome so many obstacles to get to your current position. And also, it's hard to run a big enterprise when your challenges are very fundamental. You're not sleeping well, you're not thinking well, you're not functioning at your optimum. Sure, you're still getting the job done, but it's a lot harder, and it's more impacting on a person's ability to feel good about themselves while they're in it. And I've heard these stories so many times that I felt we should look at this and say, what's going on? And I say, my book, Working Through Menopause, I wrote together with my wife, Dr. Sharon Seibel, and we did this together. And it's very important. The things that we talked about in the book, number one was, what are the issues that women are facing? And we talked about the challenges that have come up. We talked about how come it got like this. And I really believe a lot of the reasons that women ended up in the position that they were in the workplace had to do with the fact that estrogen, which was relatively commonly prescribed years ago, ended up being never prescribed almost as a result of the Women's Health Initiative. So it went from something like 40-50% of women were given hormones when they were symptomatic. They took the hormones, they felt terrific. And then they ended up hearing the story of the Women's Health Initiative, and either the women threw away their hormones out of fear, or the doctors didn't want to prescribe it out of misinformation, or what I call myth information, because myths were developed around the misinformation suggesting you couldn't give hormones effectively. So what happened was women ended up in a transitional time in life with the number one treatment removed from them. And then what ended up happening is we started getting into all kinds of other options coming on the market, some of them effective, some of them less effective, some of them completely not effective. But it's hard to know because they were thrown all these things to take as options. And what do they do? I mean, how do they do it? So what ended up happening is that women suddenly started feeling like, I can tough it out. And they ended up not getting treated at all. And even today, the majority of women, probably 70% of women today, take nothing for menopause and just struggle and suffer. And my goal has always been to help women figure it out so they don't have to tough it out. But what ended up happening then is that a whole sequence of events with women in the workplace ended up with challenges not being addressed. So we looked at this and we started breaking down the key points, the things that women need to look about. What is going on in the workplace? What are the workplace things that are being offered? What lessons can we learn from the United Kingdom, where they have been addressing menopause in the workplace for about a decade now? And what lessons can we learn that need to cross the pond and come to the United States? What are the legal issues in this? Menopause doesn't happen in a vacuum. You cannot discriminate against people on the basis of age, and you can't discriminate against people on the basis of a disability. And the legal system is just coming into the intersection of ageism and discrimination based on disability and sexism. So this intersection is starting to finally put a legal background into place, a precedent in place that women can actually go to the legal system and justifiably say, listen, I've been discriminated against because of my symptoms and my age and so forth. And then we try to dispel the myths in the book and try to offer solutions that what could businesses do and what could women do to advocate for themselves to understand this a little bit better. And I think all of these things are really important, both for women and for the workplace, because it's not just about it's the right thing to do or it's a nice thing to do. Hot flashes alone is costing businesses in the United States over $14 billion a year in work loss and work productivity loss. And that's all unnecessary. If they just get the support they need and be allowed to be educated and encouraged to get the treatment that they need and require, then they'll feel better, they'll work better, and the businesses will thrive better.
That's so, like, everything is, like you said, this is just such a complicated issue when it comes to the workforce, because like you said, there's legal ramifications. We have women leaving the workforce because they think that there's something gone wrong with them and that they're not able to function as they used to, not knowing that it is hormonal changes that are causing this. What were some of the, if in the book, what were some of the potential solutions for the at the workforce that you found that people wanted, or that they were doing in the UK that might be successful here in the US?
Well, the first thing is to destigmatize menopause. Menopause is not a disease. It is a transition that is normal, natural, and universal. Every woman will transition through menopause. Some will be more symptomatic. A lucky few percentage is not going to have any symptoms. Some will have some symptoms, and some are going to be really effective. But just because a person is in menopause is not an indicator of their ability, capability, or potential. And destigmatizing it allows a woman to rise and thrive. So that was the first thing we talked about, and what's been trying to be done in the UK, and what's beginning to happen in the United States. We also talked about making accommodations for women. COVID was not a very good thing, but it did accomplish one thing, and it got to get people thinking more flexibly about flexible work times. And starting at different hours allows someone who's had a bad night's sleep because of hot flashes or other reasons to be able to come in a little later as long as they're getting the work done. Or even to work from home if they're kind of a hot mess that day and they want to just take care of themselves. So accommodations, having adequate bathrooms in the workplace, having an opportunity, workplace, just like women have lactation rooms where they can go and breastfeed. Well, what about extending that to the rooms that women can go to kind of freshen up if they've had really bad sweating through their clothes, or maybe they have really heavy periods and are bleeding through their clothes, which does happen, particularly in perimenopause. So having a hygiene materials available for women in the workplace. Being able to modify your workstation's temperature so that you can cool and help regulate the surroundings that you work in. There are a number of things like this that are very easy to do. Having an advocate in the workplace, having an HR that is aware of the condition, and not everybody is younger than half your age and then not in any way familiar with the condition, educating the workplace, educating the executives, educating the men in the practice, in all of these kinds of things. And for the men, educating their partners, because most of the men have women partners, and those that do are going to be affected at home, which impacts their ability in the workplace as well. So there's direct and indirect impacts of menopause on the workplace. There's just so many things that can be done without a tremendous amount of cost. But I do think awareness and education is near the top of the list.
I absolutely agree. And we've heard the same from women about what are those types of accommodations that they need. And as you said, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. Many things are already in place for other situations and conditions. So we just need to sort of be thoughtful about how we apply them to other situations. And it really is important that women know that there are things that can be done to help address these symptoms. So, along those lines, what are some of your recommendations for what women can or should do to help prepare for perimenopause and menopause?
Well, obviously, there are some physical things that can be done. For instance, women should be making sure that they're addressing the lifestyle things that they can do something about. We all deal with a lot of stress. How are you dealing with that? What stress reduction can you do? Many people, many women in this transition in particular, are dealing with sleep issues. Why is that sleep bad? Is it only to do with menopause? Does it have to do with perhaps a sensitive bladder that's getting you up at night? What are the things that can be done to address the sleep issues? Everybody's going to be benefited through exercise. So getting adequate exercise every day can be helpful for hot flashes, can be helpful for sleep, can be helpful for reducing anxiety and depression. There's a lot of things that helps. It can help control weight. So those are things that exercise can do. And then finally, getting good nutrition, which is really excellent because those foods that are helpful to women, eating more fresh fruits and vegetables and plant-based diets, very helpful for addressing symptoms, for addressing mood, for addressing heart health, for addressing blood pressure. So those are things that a person can do. Getting basic testing done that they should be getting done. Bone densities done, getting their mammograms in place, getting the kinds of heart symptoms addressed and evaluated, all of those kinds of things. If they're having irregular periods during this time, to take those into consideration and help to get that regulated. If they're having hot flashes, see a medical provider that's familiar with menopause and can explain to you the difference between menopause and transitioning into it, and then being in menopause and having to live through it, and then beyond menopause. All of these phases of life have different medical preferences that can be helpful to a person. And then having an advocate in the workplace that you can talk to and help you, and getting information around to people, have educational sessions in the workplace. All of these things are things that can and should be done for women in the workplace.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. As you said, there's so many things that we can do to help prepare ourselves. And I was telling people in some conversations we were having on some webinars about the fact that midlife for women is a great time to take stock of our health across all those areas you talked about. How is our heart health? What's our physical activity levels? What are the other things that we can and should be doing to not only help with our menopausal symptoms, but to also help address some of those increased risk factors we get for things like osteoporosis and bone loss and heart disease and breast cancer. And so much of that we don't think about even as we're approaching perimenopause and menopause, but they're so important to know that those are potential areas we need to focus on as we age. So there's some great suggestions on how we can do that and make sure that we're getting ahead of things versus waiting until things have taken a turn for the worse and then realizing, oh my God, I didn't know. And we hear that so often, and I'm sure you do as well, where women are like, I didn't know anything about what to expect at menopause. So yeah, it's really important that we know what to expect and that we can then prepare for that. So
Well,
along those lines, oh, sorry.
yeah, what's normal and what's not? How long will it last? What are the things to anticipate? Am I getting dementia, or is this just a transitional window which I'm going to pass through and come out on the other end? And I will say something that often isn't talked about, and that is that women in this phase of life need to be also worrying about contraception. Because just because your periods come every once in a while, one of those periods won't come and it'll last for 9 months. And then there's always an oops baby. And so being aware, if that's not something you want to happen, that you're taking the adequate precautions about it. And if there's pain during intimacy and there's problems with dryness and those things are impacting your personal relationship, there's things to be done about that are quite simple that can make your whole life a lot easier.
Yeah, that is exactly where I think women have a lot of confusion. One, I was doing a presentation recently for a large group of professional women. And when I was talking about brain fog, some of them told me that that was an aha moment for them, that they were experiencing those moments, as we said, that are normal at perimenopause. And yet they thought the worst, oh, is this, like you said, early dementia? Or am I going to have another issue? Is this happening to me for some other reason? Versus it's a very temporary and very natural things that happen to us. So it's really important that women know about that. And like you said, we also don't talk enough about sexual health for women at midlife and beyond. And I think that's part of our society's culture. Again, if you're young, you're allowed to talk about sexual health and sexual activity. And as we get older, it's not something we're supposed to address. But these are, like you said, really important parts of life. And that's something that will really help us have a wonderful and active sex life while we age is a thing people should talk about. But we can't even sometimes get the basics from our clinicians. So, I mentioned earlier that a lot of times women feel like they're going to a healthcare provider who doesn't know or doesn't bring up the topic of menopause with them. So can you share some of the tips you might have for how a woman would initiate the conversation with her healthcare provider, even or particularly if she's not in her 50s, where we normally associate with menopause, but maybe a little bit younger? How would you suggest women approach it with their healthcare provider?
Well, first of all, I would just say that you make an important point about age. People think that menopause happens at a certain age, but menopause isn't about age, it's about transition. And for up to 10% of women, they will be in menopause by age 45. And 1% of women will be in menopause by age 40. And so it may be seemingly a smaller percentage, but it is a smaller percentage of a large number. There's 50 million women in menopause in the United States. So a couple of percent of that can be a lot. So realize that the symptoms of perimenopause, that window of transition, can begin up to 10 years before menopause. So the symptoms that many women ascribe to menopause are actually perimenopause, the transition going into it. And we have to remember now that the oldest millennials, that young group of young women, are now in their 40s. They're in their early 40s. And that is when the perimenopause symptoms start. So they may be thinking about their last baby or maybe having one more baby, and all of a sudden something hits them and wham, what's going on with my body? Why are my pants a size too small? Why am I unable to remember the name of my neighbor when I go to say hello? Why don't I know where I parked my car? And why am I getting up every night to go pee? All of these things.
Right.
Why is it so dry down there? It feels like the Sahara Desert. There's so many things that happen. And we have to remember that there are racial disparities. For instance, Black and Latino women will end up having symptoms about 8 to 10 months earlier than Caucasian women, and the symptoms will last longer. And so when it gets to vaginal dryness, and many times those things will happen and last longer in the Black and Latino community. So there has to be understanding of what's happening to your body. So if you feel like something isn't normal in your body for you, it doesn't matter what's, quote, normal. And is this normal for you? If it's not, well, then ask your healthcare provider what is going on. If the concept of perimenopause or menopause never comes up, and often it won't, because many of the women I've cared for or coached over the years of my career, they will have gone to one doctor for their palpitations in their heart, which happen often. They'll go to a cardiologist for that. They'll go to a mental health professional for their anxiety and their depression. They will go to a gynecologist for the periods that are bleeding too heavy or they're too short or they're going at abnormal intervals for them, and a urogynecologist or a urologist because their urine is their bladder is so sensitive, and all of it may be under the umbrella of simply perimenopause or menopause. If your doctor or healthcare provider doesn't seem to be aware of these things, offer these things, be able to talk to you about it, then ask for a professional who can, because usually there is someone, or you can go to a national organization like the Menopause Society, and you can find certified menopause practitioners such as myself who are familiar with these things and take extra certification exams and so forth to demonstrate their level of understanding. The other thing is if you're having a problem, particularly if it's something like intimacy or bladder problems, and the average woman doesn't talk about intimacy with her provider, they may think there's nothing that can be done. Wrong. That's the wrong thought. There are things that can be done. The average woman for a bladder problem is so embarrassed by her bladder, she's leaking and she's having trouble. They may even have leakage during intimacy. That's a really big problem for that lady, but they think nothing can be done. You just got to live with it. No, you don't have to live with that. But the average woman waits between 5 and 7 years just to tell her practitioner about it. If you're having these things, for goodness sake, tell your provider. If they can help you, ask for referral. But if you're going to ask about these things, 2 recommendations I give you. Number 1, write your questions on a piece of paper so you don't get nervous and forget. You can bring a friend with you who can listen if you have someone you're comfortable sharing this information with, so they have 2 sets of eyes and ears to hear. So when most people only remember about 10% of what you tell them after they walk out the door or by a day later. So write it down, have a friend to listen. And the third thing is make an appointment so that the purpose of that appointment is to have this discussion with your healthcare provider so that you know that you're going to have the time to go over all these things because they're very important, they're very personal, it takes time, and that sometimes people don't realize all the stuff that's really happening that they haven't kind of organized in their mind. Their health provider is going to have to try and get out of them in a way that he or she can understand how to help you, what all the breadth of what your problems are. So you need the time. So make an appointment as a consultation, not at the end of a visit when they've just got one hand on the doorknob and you're going to say, oh, about that. No, not then. If that's where you find yourself, say, can I make another follow-up appointment so that I have time to talk with you? And these are the things that matter so that you get the time you need for the information that you deserve.
I love that because you're right. Sometimes we think we don't deserve the time to ask or we're scared to ask the questions. And I find too that the recommendation about, write down those things that you want to say, because even if you're in your mind, oh, these are the things I want to ask about. 9 times out of 10, you get into that doctor's office, you're chatting about something else, and then you forget. And it's also, particularly if it's a question that you're a little bit nervous about, or it's about intimacy or something, being able to look down at the paper versus making eye contact is a great way to build courage to actually ask the question. And I love that advice. And I didn't think about that, about when to bring up the questions or to schedule a different consultation for it, until it started being recommended by some of the doctors that I work with for the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, where they were saying, if you have a long conversation or questions or a lot of questions that you want about treatment, for example, don't do that on a well visit. Do that in a special meeting. And the same goes for our menopausal symptoms, to be able to say, one, if you're there because you're sick, then you need to focus on why you're there and what needs to be done to make you feel better. And then 2, if you're just there for a well woman checkup, as you said, the clinician is not expecting to have a longer conversation about this. So really scheduling that time makes perfect sense. And I hope more women will consider doing that, because they might find they get a much better reception from their healthcare provider when they schedule a specific consultation.
They're definitely going to find that. If you have 5 more people waiting to see you and everybody's filling out an evaluation, was it on time? Was it this? How long did you have to wait? You're going to move to the next room because that's the way the system works today. But if you have that time, you will get that time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we could go on and on. There's so many things that I could ask you, but we'll definitely have you back another time. But I just wanted to end with, given your overall decades of experience in women's health, what's your current feeling about both the challenges and opportunities we're facing in women's health, and particularly in women's health as we age?
Well, as Charles Dickens said, it's the best of times, it was the worst of times. On the one hand, healthcare is very fragmented today. And so we tend to live in silos. And if you want your left foot, we recommend you go to a left foot specialist. And everything is sort of separate. So you have to find providers that really are going to be addressing your issues. And if you have that provider, then bring your issues there and be able to express them and be able to get the time, as I've talked about, to have treatment. That's the challenges. But the good thing is that it seems like in every series of months that goes by, there's new treatments that are coming out. There's new diagnostics that are coming out. There's more specific kinds of treatments for very specific kinds of problems. The thing that I try to keep in mind when I deal with women in any kind of symptom they come with is to try and take care of the sum of you and not just some of you. By that I mean, let's just say you go in and you decide you either want or are a candidate for hormone therapy. And I'm not pushing hormone therapy, even though I've written the estrogen window and the estrogen fix. I know about it, but there's many other options. But the point I'm trying to make is if you have hormone therapy, it goes to your brain, it goes to your skin, it goes to your breast, your bladder, your vagina, your bones, everywhere it goes, to almost every cell in your body. So you're treating a lot. But if you choose not to, like the overwhelming majority of the country, about at least 85% of women are not on estrogen. Okay, but then you have to realize that you're now into symptom treatment. And there are silent treatments, silent problems such as osteoporosis or heart disease, which silently go on until you either break a leg or a hip or have a heart attack or a stroke. On the other hand, there are noisy ones like hot flashes, like foggy brain, like leaky bladder. All those things, they're happening, but those other ones you don't. So you have got to then address the noisy and the silent symptoms, and you have to have a discussion about the sum of you. And all of those things are not static. What you are today will change over the next 5 years, some for the better and some for the worse. And if you don't even know they're happening, then that's the problem. So you have to be aware that you're eligible for these kinds of treatments. First, you have to know you have the problems. And so what I would say to you is, it's the best of times for options. It's the worst of times. You have to find people who can work with you over time to help you get the information and the treatments that will help you. And again, I say that you deserve.
That's perfect. That's really wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Seibel, for sharing your passion, your expertise with us. We will include additional information and resources about you and your book and your work with the notes of this episode so our listeners can follow up and learn more. I hope you've all enjoyed this episode as much as I have. If so, please subscribe to the Positive Pause podcast so you never miss an episode. And please share the information about this podcast with your family and friends. Thank you again to my guest, Dr. Mache Seibel, and thank you for listening. We hope you'll tune in to another episode of The Positive Pause.